really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here today for another episode. If you've been listening over the last month or two, you'll know that I've been going through a list of most frequently Googled questions about life, and this was something put out by Google themselves about the questions people are most often searching for related to life. There's tons of other stuff people search for, but these are the questions they're asking about life itself. So I've been going through that list and trying to come up with my own answers, just pondering some of those questions and thinking about how I might answer that question. Because to be honest, these are the essential questions of our humanity. Things like, what is love? How do I find love? How do I find happiness? How do I forgive people? And these are really the same or very similar to the spiritual lessons that I've been writing about in my books, 7 Lessons for Living from the Dying and The Journey from Ego to Soul. And so it really resonates with me that all of us are out there asking about these things. And what I observed in my patients at the end of life when I was working as a hospice doctor is that in particular, people who are approaching their own death are much more interested in asking these kinds of questions. The question I'll be looking at today is, what is the meaning of life? Last week I talked about the purpose, like what am I doing here in the first place, but this is a little bit broader and more existential question in a way. In general, what is the meaning of life itself beyond what is just the meaning or purpose of my own life? And this is one of the most important questions I have seen dying patients work through, because as life is coming to an end, each one of us is confronted with that question in our minds. What did this all mean? What did I accomplish? What was life about? The fact that I was here. So it is related somewhat to purpose that I talked about before, but it's bigger than that. It's trying to understand this universe or the universes that we exist within, and why is it that there are human beings on this planet Earth? What are we here for, and what does it mean that we go through these lives? We're born, and then ultimately we die. What is the deeper meaning of all of that? Now, obviously, that's a massive question. And here I am on a little 30-minute podcast trying to talk about it and answer it. But I honestly think it's helpful to us when we try to reduce the question down to basics. And how is it that we ask that question and live out the question of meaning in our own day-to-day lives? Because if we only look at the meaning of life from this huge, broad, expansive perspective, we will never really find an answer to it. It isn't really an answerable question in that regard. But if we can reduce it down to moment in our daily lives, I think that we can find meaning for ourselves in each moment. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I want to take this question from being almost a frightening, overwhelming question that takes us off into places where we feel confused and lost and alone and also hopeless in some ways, down to what if we apply meaning to every breath we take, to every moment that we're alive? Can we cope with our questions about what it means in a better way? So the text that I turn to over and over again, that I read many, many years ago, but it's right next to me on my bookshelf at all times, is the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. If you haven't read it, You really should read it. This is a life-changing book that can just open your mind and expand your consciousness, especially around this idea of meaning. And Viktor Frankl was just a brilliant psychiatrist, a bright light who had this amazing insight. And if you don't know his story, I will tell you that he was a psychiatrist from Vienna who was imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps in Auschwitz and Dachau. And he worked in the medical unit there and cared for people as they were dying. And so part of his book, he had actually conceived of some of these ideas before he was ever in a concentration camp. But in the concentration camp, I believe his ideas about meaning and what life really means were crystallized. And just very briefly, Frankl observed in the concentration camps that the people who survived all of this tremendous, incredible suffering that they had to endure in the concentration camp, those who survived it always had some sense of meaning to their lives. They were able to find meaning even within the suffering that they were going through in the concentration camp. Those who felt despair and had no sense of meaning were much more likely to die, and die hopelessly within the concentration camp. So that is a profound realization. And again, you have to read the book. There's no way that I can sum it up for you, but it's such an important factor to recognize whenever we're going through difficulties or through suffering. If we are able to find some sense of meaning in the midst of it, we have a much better chance of surviving it, of actually growing through it. And that's what happened to Frankl himself in the concentration camp and to those people he observed who were survivors. And so I'm going to sum up 3 quick little points that Frankl makes in his writings, which is, first of all, that the primary motivation of human beings is to find meaning in life, that all of us are motivated to search for meaning. And we will go through times in our lives when we're completely oblivious to that. We never think about it. It's not an issue for us. But there will be other times when it becomes the most important, most crucial question we can ask, particularly at the end of life, but also other times of life. I think when we're going through a lot of loss and grief, when we're confused about why life isn't turning out the way we hoped it would, and we're suffering and in pain because of that. Those are all times when we're much more likely to face that inner question that we carry with us at all times. What does this mean? What is the meaning of life? And so a second idea from Frankl is that meaning is found whenever we give ourselves over to something greater than ourselves. So some of the stories he described from the concentration camp were people who looked out for others. Sometimes they shared their little crust of bread with another person who was in particularly bad shape, who was starving. They gave up their own crust of bread for another person. Or sometimes they went out of their way to help someone else, to carry them or walk with them or talk to them or sing songs or write poetry. Those who had some sense of there could be a reason that I'm here, there's some sort of meaning for me to be here, who were actually creating the meaning for themselves moment to moment by looking out for others and responding when they saw need around them. And so that's the idea of giving yourself over to something that's greater than just you, greater than just your life and what is happening to you in the moment. So for me, this is the idea of learning how to get guidance from our higher selves, our souls, I call it, but you could call it whatever you want, higher consciousness, our wiser selves, versus being guided by our egos, which would have us totally contract and become smaller and focus only on why is this happening to me, my suffering, what I need, what I want. And so to be able to rise beyond just the concerns of the ego, to get into our higher consciousness and recognize the needs of other people around us, meaning comes from that ability to rise above the ego. And so, as he said, Frankl says, meaning is found whenever we give ourselves over to something greater than ourselves, something greater than just my own ego and what it is asking me to accomplish or what it wants me to do for myself. And then a third point that Frankl makes is that we can always find meaning even in the midst of deepest suffering. And I think that's something that we don't always realize, or something that we're not always aware of. We may be looking for meaning, but waiting to find it in positive circumstances, like that meaning will come from the success I have, or the praise I get from other people, or something that I accomplish in this world. But meaning actually dwells in the midst of suffering, and we are able to find it if we look for it at any time, no matter how dire the circumstances are. And that's been the case for my patients on their deathbeds. In spite of the suffering they were experiencing, they were able to ask questions about the meaning of life and to begin to see meaning within their own suffering. And because life on planet Earth is filled with suffering, we cannot escape it. It's simply part of being human and existing in fragile bodies that are going to die one day. Suffering is inherent in our life here on planet Earth. The sooner we realize that fact, the better off we are, because we stop resisting suffering and complaining about it and wishing we could escape from it. We start allowing the presence of suffering in our lives to just be a normal fact of life. Then we can turn our focus a little further beyond that and think, so given that the suffering's here, I'm not going to take it away. It doesn't help me to complain about it and be angry and upset about it. I simply have to live with this. So how can I make something of it? How can I find something bigger and better and higher, wiser, kinder, more loving within this suffering? So if we can tweak our mindset a little bit when we're in the midst of our suffering and turn our focus from the why me attitude of, oh, why did this happen to me? I don't deserve it. This isn't fair. It isn't right, into, okay, this has happened. This is how life is. This has just happened to me. And not only do I have to live with it and accept it, I want to find a way to rise above it and find meaning and create meaning within it. Now, of course, you don't have to live that way. You are a free person, and you can continue to be angry at your suffering, and you can dwell in a place of rejecting suffering for your entire life if you choose to. But Frankl has described that within all of us, there is some sort of a driving force toward finding meaning. And if you've never felt that within yourself, you may not believe that that's true, but you never know. There might be a time in your life when suddenly you experience that urge within you that says, I need to know what this means. I need to understand this. So I want to go over those 3 points from Viktor Frankl again. First of all, that it is a primary motivation of human beings to find meaning in life, whether or not we're aware of it at all times, and whether or not it even surfaces for most of us before we end up on our deathbeds. It is a primary motivation. Number 2, meaning is found whenever we give ourselves over to something greater than ourselves. Whenever we get out of our own egos and can see beyond it, can look at the bigger picture, can look at the whole around us. Now, I realize I talked before about bringing meaning down from the big picture into the momentary, but the idea is to be able to see the big picture, but from moment to moment, if that makes any sense. So in a way, we're holding both perspectives. We're looking at the whole of humanity, even our entire planet, and all of the life on our planet. And how can I create meaning by being aware of the needs of the whole? But how do I do that moment to moment in my day-to-day life? And instead of trying to create a huge grand project outside of us, how do I bring that awareness of the needs of the whole down into every breath I take and every moment of my life? I hope that makes some sense. And then the third point from Viktor Frankl is we can always find meaning even in the midst of deepest suffering. And so those are the moments when we're most likely to think there is no meaning, life is hopeless, life doesn't mean anything. Those are the times when we're most likely to get discouraged and depressed, to feel alone and isolated and abandoned. But this knowledge coming from Viktor Frankl, from his observations and from how he lived his life, that it's always possible to find meaning. It puts the responsibility back on me. The meaning is there. Meaning resides in everything that happens. It's simply up to me to see the meaning that's there. It's up to me to put myself in the mindset and to open my eyes and my heart in a way that I can see the meaning that is already there, existing. That's not an easy thing to do by any means, so I don't mean to imply that. And maybe it takes us an entire lifetime to work on this issue of how to see the meaning that resides within our suffering. But I love the reassurance from Viktor Frankl that there is meaning. And you just may not be able to see it right now. And perhaps it's not the right time for you to see it. That may happen another time. That may happen later. And so don't despair if you can't experience meaning within your suffering. It may just be that it's not the right timing and things are not quite ready yet for you to have that realization. So I wanted to tell a story. I can't remember if I've told this story on this podcast or how many times I may have told this story, but it's going all the way back to when I was 16 years old. At that time, I already knew that I wanted to be a doctor. I saw that as my purpose in life, the whole reason that I was born, why I'm on the planet, to be a doctor, so that I could help people. And when I was 16, one of my classmates from high school died in a hiking accident, in a terrible fall when she was out for a hike with her youth group. And it was such a shocking experience to have a classmate die at such a young age, and to die in a way that seemed senseless. Like, why? Why would that happen? Like, how horrible that she was ripped out of this life. She was an amazing person. She was beautiful and vibrant and someone who loved life and brought joy wherever she went. How is it in any way fair, or how does that have any meaning that she would die at this young age before she was able to complete her life and have a full life of experience? Well, at her funeral, the priest who spoke knew her really well, and he said to us, she lived more in her 16 years than most people live in whatever 96 years. And that statement really stuck with me. He implied that even though she only lived 16 years, she fulfilled her purpose. And the meaning of her life was complete in 16 years because of the way she lived day to day. That awareness kind of threw me into a state of panic temporarily, along with the awareness that someone who's my age could actually die. For the first time, I was actually confronting the fact that all of us die, and it could happen at any age, not just when we're old. I was in a bit of a state of confusion and panic, after her death and after hearing the priest talk about how she had fulfilled her purpose in just 16 years. And what I was panicking about is that I had already decided my purpose was to become a doctor, but I had a lot of years of life and education to go through before I could become a doctor. So this realization that I could die at any time, there's no guarantee that I'll live long enough to make it through my training to become a doctor. And what if I do die? What if I die before I get to that place, before I succeed and before I accomplish my purpose? Will my life be meaningless then? Will my life be a failure if I happen to die before I finish this task that I think I came here to do? So I really struggled with that question for about 3 days. I was contemplating it constantly and working it through and struggling to find an answer. And then on the third day, I fell asleep in our living room in the middle of the afternoon. And when I woke up, I don't know if I dreamt about something when I was asleep. I don't know. I don't remember. I just know that when I woke up, there was one word on my mind, and that word was love. And I suddenly knew that the meaning of my life, the purpose for my life, was not necessarily to become a doctor. It was to learn about love. And that what I was doing here was trying to take in all the knowledge and the experience of love that I could. And being a doctor might be a really good way to work on learning about love. But that my real purpose, the real meaning of my life, was just to focus on love. And as long as I was doing that, it wouldn't matter if I died before I ever became a doctor, because I could work on love and learning about love and experiencing love every day in every moment of my life. I didn't have to go to school for 12 years in order to accomplish that purpose, in order to have that meaning in my life. So for me, this idea that love was the meaning of life, and that I was here to try to learn how to find love, how to experience love in every single situation of my life. And so this underlies a lot of other stories from my life, my father's death and going through grief and working in hospice, and all along being reinforced that for me, it's really about love. So I came away with this pretty simple notion at the age of 16 that the meaning of life for me, what it's all about, the reason I'm here, what I came here to accomplish and to do, is simply to love. At the time, I didn't have much of an idea of what love really is. I hadn't been around long enough to experience very many of the different types of love that you can have in life. So I had a huge amount of learning to do from there. I'm telling you this because I just want you to understand, for me, the simple explanation for me, what is the meaning of my life, is love. It always involves love, one way or another. My goal in everything is to figure out, how can I find more love? How can I experience more love? How can I give more love to other people? And that meaning for me has held up through every type of suffering I've experienced, through everything discouraging and dark and difficult that has happened in my life. Love has not let me down. So for me, love, I would say, is the very simple meaning of my life and why I'm here and what it's about. And if you listen all the way through to the end of any of my podcasts, I always talk about that. We're here for love, and remember to love every moment of your life. That's what I believe for me, because that's what I've discovered and learned throughout my lifetime. I'm not saying that's the answer for everyone else. I think each person has to draw their own conclusions and find their own way, their own path, and find their own meaning in their life. I'm just explaining to you how I came to find love as meaning in my life. and how it informs every single thing that I do. Because if I'm in a situation where I have a difficult decision to make and I'm not sure which way to go, I stop and ask myself, what is the most loving thing I could do? Which option do I feel contains the most love? And I am saying again, like, love does not lead me astray. If I turn to love and I ask myself, what has the deepest love, the broadest love, the truest love within it, I can find my way through things that I need to get through. Now, I don't always remember to think in those terms. I don't always remember to look within and to look for love. And I don't always remember to find meaning within my suffering. So, just like all of us, I go through hard days and down days and doubt and uncertainty and concern and anger and feeling abandoned and betrayed. All of those same emotions I go through myself. Eventually, though, I'm usually able to gradually pull myself back. And it's like I wake up again one day with that word on my mind, love. Oh, that's right. It's love. It's love. That's right. Where's the love in this situation? How can I find it? How do I find it within me? How do I share it? How do I bring more love into this situation? So for me, that is how I came about finding a meaning for myself, that it's one word, love, and it's simple enough that in every single moment, as I said, with every breath, I can stop and think, love, 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 and remind myself, you're not in a place of love right now. That's why you're feeling miserable and why you're misbehaving and saying terrible things and hurting other people around you. You're not coming from the place of love that you know about, that exists inside. And so I can turn myself around. I can change my mindset. I can change my mood, and I can change my approach to things. Again, not always instantly. It takes sometimes days or weeks for that transformation to happen. But when I always return to love, I find my way right back to that true path that feels exactly right to me in the moment. And so it's not just that I myself found love as the deepest meaning of my life, but many other people have as well. And I already mentioned my hospice patients that I've worked with at the very end of life, who told me over and over again, I'm just learning that love is what matters to me more than anything else. Or those who declare that being with the people they love and experiencing love is the only thing they care about in their last days of life. That is their greatest priority. So those patients validated what I felt inside. Also, many people I've spoken to who have had near-death experiences have talked about the idea that they have experienced love as the most important thing, the only thing that actually exists in the light in this other realm beyond this physical life. That love, what we should be focusing on throughout our lives. And I've heard cancer patients and people who have taken psychedelic medications all say the very same thing. And I've heard spiritual leaders and enlightened people all say, it all comes down to love. Love is what really matters. So that meaning for me that I found for my life has been validated by other people who have had a similar experience. And Viktor Frankl wrote, "Then I grasped the meaning of that greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love." And what that means is what will help us get through anything is love, if we're aware of love as part of our meaning. And Frankl also wrote, "Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self." So once again, he's talking about love as being the depth of us inside, our highest consciousness, our deepest self. our most expanded awareness of who we are, our part of us that is most connected to the divine. That is where love resides, and that is what love consists of. It's not about physical beauty or physical attributes or things we do in the physical realm. It's so much more about who and what we are spiritually. So I'm telling you, to sum all this up, that for me, the meaning that I have found in my life is simply that it's about love, and we're here for love. And the more we focus on it, the better we will be able to live our lives. And once again, I can't say that that's the meaning that everyone should find or the right meaning for everyone else to have, only that that's what I have found for myself. So it's a path we each have to dwell upon. We each have to experience whatever comes to us in our lives. We have to go through it. We have to figure out how to cope with the suffering that life brings with us, and how to see whatever meaning lies within that suffering. So I hope you will read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl if you haven't. And then you could also read my book, 7 Lessons for Living from the Dying and the Journey from Ego to Soul, to do some more thinking about this. But no matter what you do, be willing to recognize that there is meaning within suffering, no matter how meaningless it appears from the outside. Be willing to be patient with yourself, to allow that meaning to reveal itself to you and to come to the surface, and open your mind and your heart to finding meaning and value in everything in your life, no matter what happens. So, as we say goodbye here, I will remind you, as I've been saying, that I believe we're here for love, and that that's the most important thing we could work on here. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings your way, and love each and every single moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.